She had been standing in the lobby for 4 hours. Not sitting. Standing. A 3-year-old asleep on her shoulder, one bag at her feet, and shoes worn down past the sole on the left side. The building was glass and steel, and men in suits who looked through her the way you look through a window you have no reason to open. She had not asked for anyone by name. She told the front desk one thing: "I will wait until he comes down." She knew he crossed the lobby at 6:15 every evening. She knew because she had stood in this same spot 3 days before and watched. And 3 days before that, he had walked past her twice already. The third time the child woke up and looked directly at his face. She said one sentence. He did not expect it from someone asking for a job. He gave her 30 days. He did not know yet that on day 29 his entire board would be looking at her name on a document that changed the future of his company. And that the name had been there for 11 years. Darnell Quincy Ashford was 52 years old. He had built Ashford Meridian Capital from a single commercial lease in East Baltimore into a real estate empire that operated across 14 states. He did not build it through luck. He built it through a system. Every decision ran through the same filter. What is the return? What is the risk? What is the cost of being wrong? He applied this to properties. He applied it to people. He applied it to every room he walked into, and every hand he shook, and every conversation that lasted longer than it needed to. He did not have a family. Not because he could not. Because family was a variable he could not model. Children were liabilities that compounded. Wives were partnerships with no exit clause. He had decided this at 31 and had not revisited the decision since. This is not cruelty. It is efficiency. There is a difference. That is what he told himself. He had been telling himself that for 21 years. The third time he crossed the lobby, the child on the woman's shoulder was awake. The girl was 3 years old. She had her mother's stillness. She did not cry. She did not reach for him. She did not look away. She looked at him the way someone looks at a door they have been waiting for someone to open. Darnell stopped walking. He looked at the woman, at the bag at her feet, at the shoes. The left sole was worn past the tread. The right was close behind. He looked at her hands. They were steady. The way she held the child was not the grip of someone about to collapse. It was the grip of someone who had been holding on for a long time and had stopped noticing the weight. She spoke before he did. "I do not need charity. I need 30 days. If I do not earn it, I will leave and you will never see me again." He did not respond for 11 seconds. She counted. She had learned a long time ago that silence from powerful men was not rejection. It was processing. What position? Any position. Start me anywhere. He looked at the child again. The girl was still watching him. Not with hope. Not with fear. Just watching. As if she already knew what he was going to do and was simply waiting for him to catch up. Darnell took out his phone. He called his executive assistant. She answered on the first ring the way she always did. Jolene Therese Kinsley. Process her. Mailroom. Minimum wage. 30 days. His assistant looked through the glass wall of the lobby at the woman standing near the front desk with a sleeping bag strap still visible under her coat and a child balanced on one hip. The assistant had seen 100 people try to get through that lobby. She had processed their hope and filed it under rejected. She looked at Jolene the way you look at someone you have already categorized. Then she looked at Darnell. And she saw something she had not seen in 4 years of working for him. She did not have a word for it, but it made her process the paperwork without asking a single question. Darnell did not give Jolene a chance because he believed in her. He did not know her. He had not read a resume. He had not checked a reference. He gave her 30 days because a 3-year-old girl had looked at him across a marble lobby with an expression that contained no expectation at all, and that absence had hit him harder than any pitch he had heard in 20 years of boardrooms. He did not ask her last name. He would not check it for 28 days. When he did, he would understand why she had chosen his company and no other. The building had 34 floors. The mailroom was in the basement. Jolene started there on a Monday morning at 6:00. She had dropped Naomi at the city's free daycare program 40 minutes earlier. The program ran until 5:30 the evening. Jolene's shift ended at 6:00. The daycare was 14 blocks from the building. She had 30 minutes to cover them. She covered them every day. She never missed. The mailroom was fluorescent lights and metal carts and the smell of toner and old carpet. Packages came in through a loading dock on the south side. Internal mail moved through a system that had not been updated in 6 years. There were routing slips, color-coded bins, a manual log that Coretta May Bridges had maintained since before the building changed its name. Coretta May Bridges, 61 years old. She had worked in this basement for 19 years. She had outlasted 4 CEOs, 3 rebrands, and 1 complete renovation that replaced everything on every floor above her and left the mailroom exactly as it was. She did not take this personally. She took it as confirmation of what she had always suspected. The people upstairs thought the mail delivered itself. Coretta watched Jolene on the first morning and said nothing. She watched the way Jolene opened the first bin, read the routing slips, and began sorting without asking for instructions. Her hands moved through the envelopes the way hands move through something they have done before. Not fast, precise. Each piece placed without hesitation. No second guessing, no checking. On the second morning, Coretta stood beside the sorting table and watched for 20 minutes. Then she said one thing. "You have done this before." Jolene did not look up. "I have done everything before." Coretta did not ask what that meant. She had spent 19 years in a basement watching people arrive and disappear. She knew the difference between someone who was passing through and someone who had arrived with a purpose they were not ready to explain. Jolene was the second kind. Coretta could tell by the way she never looked at the clock. People who are just getting through the day look at the clock. People who are working towards something do not need to. They already know exactly how much time they have left. Jolene ran 14 blocks every evening at 531. She ran in the shoes with the worn soles. She ran past storefronts and crosswalks and people who did not look up. She arrived at the daycare door at 558 every single night. Not 555, not 601, 558. The precision was not accidental. She had walked the route once, timed it, and then shaved 2 minutes off by eliminating 1 crosswalk and cutting through the parking structure on 7th. Naomi was always sitting by the window when she arrived. 3 years old. Quiet in the way that children become quiet when they have learned that noise does not bring help any faster. She would see Jolene through the glass and her face would change. Not a smile exactly. Recognition. The kind of recognition that only exists between 2 people who have no one else. "You came to get me. I always come to get you." It was the same exchange every night. The same words, the same order, said the same way. It did not mean much yet. It was just something a mother said to a daughter at the end of a long day in a city that did not slow down for either of them. It would mean more later, but not yet. By the end of the first week, Jolene had done something no one in the mailroom had done in 6 years. She had reorganized the internal delivery routes. She did not ask permission. She did not submit a proposal. She did not mention it to anyone. She simply began delivering to floors in a different sequence. She consolidated redundant stops. She identified 3 departments on adjacent floors that had been receiving separate deliveries 20 minutes apart when a single run could service all 3. By Friday, the average internal delivery time had dropped from 26 hours to 15. Nobody on the upper floors noticed. The documents simply arrived faster. Nobody questioned why. Coretta noticed. She stood at the routing board on Friday afternoon and looked at the revised path Jolene had drawn in pencil on the back of a discarded envelope. She studied it for a long time. She did not say anything to Jolene about it, but she pinned the envelope to the board and left it there. What Coretta did not see was what Jolene read while she sorted. Every envelope that passed through her hands carried information. Not the contents, the labels, the department names, the project codes, the routing hierarchies. Who reported to whom? Which floors handled which divisions? Where legal sat in relation to compliance? Where risk sat in relation to operations? Where the CEO's office mail was routed versus where it was actually delivered? Jolene was not just sorting mail. She was mapping the company from the inside out. She had read every annual report Ashford Meridian had published in the last 6 years. She had read them in the public library on Saturdays while Naomi slept in a stroller beside the reference desk. She knew the company's organizational structure better than most people who worked on the 30th floor. She had her reasons. She had not shared those reasons with anyone. She did not intend to. Not yet. On Thursday afternoon of the first week, a document jammed in the copy machine on the 12th floor. Jolene was delivering a package to the adjacent office when she heard the machine cycling without output. She opened the tray. Inside was a single-page memo, legal department header, marked confidential, addressed to the CEO. She did not read it. She cleared the jam, placed the memo in a fresh envelope, and delivered it to the CEO's assistant within 9 minutes of finding it. She logged the delivery. She noted the time. She moved on. But she had seen a name on the memo before she placed it in the envelope. A name printed in the CC line. A name she had known for 11 years. She did not react. She had trained herself not to react to that name a long time ago. Jolene Therese Kinsley grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in southeast Washington, D.C. The building was brick. The hallways smelled like pine sol and other people's cooking. The rent was paid on time every month by 2 people who believed that on time meant 2 days early, because the world does not give second chances to people who look like them. Her father was Wendell Marcus Kinsley, civil engineer. Self-taught first, then formally trained at night school while working full-time for a small construction firm that built municipal infrastructure in neighborhoods the larger firms did not bid on. Bridges, drainage systems, load-bearing walls for public housing that the city had neglected for decades and then suddenly remembered existed when a journalist wrote about it. Wendell did not build landmarks. He built the things that kept other things standing. He understood foundations. He understood load distribution. He understood that the part of a building nobody sees is the part that determines whether the building survives. He taught Jolene to read blueprints when she was 8 years old. Not as a game, as a language. He spread them across the kitchen table after dinner and traced the lines with his finger and told her what each one meant. This is a bearing wall. This is where the weight travels. This is what happens if you remove this column. She learned structural logic before she learned algebra. Her mother was Diane Patrice Kinsley, night shift nurse at the public hospital on Martin Luther King Avenue. She worked 1:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. 4 nights a week for 14 years. She came home in the morning smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. She slept until 1:00 p.m. Then she got up and ran the household with the same precision she applied to patient charts. Diane taught Jolene to manage money. Not in theory, in practice. She gave Jolene the household budget at age 10 and asked her to find where the waste was. Jolene found $47 a month in overlapping subscriptions and a pharmacy charge that had been duplicated for 3 months without anyone noticing. Diane did not praise her. She said good and then asked her to find more. Between them, Wendell and Diane built something that did not appear on any balance sheet. They built a daughter who understood that systems could be read, that problems had structures, and that the distance between where you are and where you belong is not measured in miles. It is measured in what you know and what you are willing to do with it. Wendell carried a notebook. Brown leather cover. The corners were soft from years in his coat pocket. It smelled like ballpoint ink and concrete dust. He wrote in it every day. Project notes, structural calculations, sketches of load paths drawn in the margins of grocery lists, solutions to problems that had not been assigned to him but that he solved anyway because solving them was how his mind stayed sharp. He wrote one thing on the last page, a message addressed to Jolene. She did not read it until years later. She was not ready. She did not know yet what it contained, but she carried the notebook the way he carried it, in her coat pocket, close, where it could not be taken without her knowing. Wendell drew diagrams on napkins at the dinner table. He would hold up a napkin and say to Jolene, "Look at this," and then he would sketch a cross-section of a retaining wall or a column footing or the stress distribution pattern of a bridge deck and explain it in words she could follow. Not simplified, translated. He never talked down to her. He talked across to her as if she were a colleague who happened to be 9 years old and sitting at a kitchen table eating rice and beans. Diane would watch from the doorway and say nothing. Not because she did not care, because she recognized what was happening. Her husband was not teaching their daughter engineering. He was teaching her that she was worth teaching, that her mind was a place worth building in, that no one could take what she put inside it. They both believed that. They said it to her often enough that it became part of how she thought. Nobody can take what you put in your head. It was the closest thing the Kinsley family had to a creed. It lived in the apartment on the 3rd floor of the walk-up in Southeast D.C., the way other families keep photographs on the wall. Present, visible, referenced without being spoken. The notebook sat on Wendell's nightstand when he was home and traveled in his coat when he was not. Jolene knew it by sight, the way she knew his hands or the sound of his key in the front door at 640 every evening. It was part of him. It would become part of her. But she did not know that yet. Wendell Marcus Kinsley died on a Thursday morning in March. He was 41 years old. The construction site was a municipal drainage project on the east side of the city, a retaining wall that he had flagged as structurally compromised 3 weeks earlier. He had written the report himself. Detailed. Specific. He had noted the exact points where the load distribution was insufficient. He had recommended immediate reinforcement before any crew worked below grade. The report went to his supervisor. His supervisor sent it to the general contractor. The general contractor read the cost estimate for the recommended reinforcement and made a decision. The decision was not based on engineering. It was based on margin. The reinforcement would cost $340, 000. The project was already over budget. The contractor wrote 2 words in the margin of the report. Non-critical. Proceed. 3 weeks later, the wall failed. Wendell was below grade when it came down. He was pulled from the debris by the crew he had tried to protect. He was pronounced dead at the site. The ambulance that arrived did not turn on its lights for the drive to the hospital. There was no rush. Jolene was in 8th grade. She was in a math class when the school counselor came to the door. She knew before the counselor spoke. She knew because of the way the counselor looked at the teacher first, instead of at her. People look at each other when they are deciding how to deliver bad news. Jolene had learned to read that look. Diane filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the general contractor within 4 months. She hired a lawyer on contingency. The lawyer was competent. The contractor's legal team was not competent. It was expensive. There is a difference. The case went through 14 months of motions and delays and procedural challenges designed not to find truth but to exhaust the person seeking it. Diane lost. The court ruled that the contractor had met minimum compliance standards at the time of the incident. Minimum. The word followed the Kinsley family like a second eviction notice. The legal fees Diane's attorney had advanced were recovered from the settlement offer that never came. Diane owed nothing in cash. She owed everything in the time and health she had spent. The stress changed her. She made an error on a patient chart 4 months after the ruling, a dosage miscalculation. No one was harmed, but the hospital terminated her. Not because one error warranted termination. Because one error from a nurse who had been showing up late and losing weight and forgetting to sign off on charts for 3 months was enough for the institution to decide she was a liability rather than a person going through something. Diane did not fight the termination. She did not have the energy. She had spent everything she had on a legal system that told her that her husband's death met minimum standards and on a hospital that told her that her grief did not meet theirs. Jolene was 16. She took a job bussing tables at a restaurant 6 blocks from the apartment. She worked from 4:00 to 10:00 after school. She did her homework on the bus. She brought home food from the kitchen at the end of every shift. The manager allowed it. He had a daughter the same age. Diane did not die of any single cause. She died the way a building collapses when you remove the supports one at a time and tell yourself each one is non-critical. The hospital. The lawsuit. The empty chair at the kitchen table where a man used to draw diagrams on napkins. Her body did not fail from disease. It failed from the accumulated cost of being told repeatedly by every system she turned to for help that what had been taken from her did not matter enough to correct. She died on a Sunday morning in November. Jolene was 17. She found her mother in the bedroom. The light was coming through the window at the angle her father used to describe in his notebook as the reason he loved that apartment. The morning light. The one that made the room feel like the world was doing something kind. Jolene stood in the doorway for a long time. She did not have a trust fund. She did not have a relative who could take her in. She did not have a lawyer, or a plan, or a savings account, or a single adult in her life who was required by law or love to make sure she survived. She had a notebook with her father's handwriting in it, and a lease she could not pay, and a closet full of her mother's nurse uniforms that still smelled like antiseptic, and a body that had learned to keep moving because stopping was not an option the world had offered her. The company that had ignored her father's safety report was not small. It was a subsidiary, a construction arm of a larger entity that operated under a different name. The parent company sat several layers above the contractor in a corporate structure designed to separate liability from profit. Jolene did not know the name of the parent company. Not then. She would not learn it for another 11 years. Jolene turned 18 inches the apartment alone. She worked 2 jobs, bussing tables and cleaning offices for a janitorial company that paid cash and did not ask for documentation she did not have. She slept 5 hours a night. She read her father's notebook on the bus the way other people read scripture. Not for comfort, for instruction. The notebook was not sentimental to her. It was operational. Every page contained a solution to a problem. Structural calculations, load path analyses, notes on material strength and failure points. Her father had spent his career solving problems that other people created by cutting corners. The notebook was a record of every time he had been right and every time the system had not cared. She began taking courses online at 19. Business administration, accounting, construction management fundamentals. She paid for them with the cleaning job. She studied between shifts on a laptop she bought at a pawn shop for $85. The screen had a crack across the lower left corner that she covered with tape. She did not fix it. She did not have $85 to spend twice. At 20, she found out she was pregnant. The father was a man she had been seeing for 4 months. He stopped returning her calls 2 weeks before she took the test. She did not look for him. She did not have time for a search that would not change the result. She had a child coming, and no one to help, and 2 jobs, and an online course load, and a notebook in her coat pocket. Naomi was born in July. Jolene was back at work 11 days later. Not because she wanted to be, because the rent was due on the 1st, and the 1st did not care that she had given birth on the 20th. At 22, she finished her associate degree. She completed it entirely online. She completed it while working 2 jobs and raising a 2-year-old in a 1-bedroom apartment where the radiator worked 3 days out of 7 and the hot water was reliable only before 60 inches the morning. At 23, she began the research. Not academic research, personal research. She started with the public record of her father's death, the OSHA incident report, the contractor's name, the contractor's registration. She followed the corporate filings backward through layers of ownership the way her father had taught her to trace load paths through a building. Follow the weight, see where it lands. The contractor was a subsidiary of a regional construction group. The regional group was a portfolio company of a development firm based in New York. The development firm was wholly owned by a capital holding company that operated across 14 states and managed $2.3 billion in commercial real estate assets. The name of the holding company was Ashford Meridian Capital. The CEO was Darnell Quincy Ashford. His office was on the 34th floor of a building on the east side of Manhattan. She did not go to the building on Lexington Avenue to beg for a job. She went because her father's death had a return address, and it was on the 34th floor. The second week moved faster than the first. Not because Jolene worked faster, because the building had started to feel the effects of someone who understood systems operating inside a system that had forgotten it was one. On day 8, she found a scheduling conflict in the conference room booking software that had been creating double bookings on the 22nd floor for 6 months. The IT department had been notified 3 times, each time the ticket had been marked resolved without being fixed. Jolene did not submit a 4th ticket. She accessed the shared calendar through a terminal in the mailroom that no one had logged out of in 2 years, identified the recursive error in the booking logic, and corrected it in 11 minutes. Nobody on the 22nd floor knew who had fixed it. They only knew the double booking stopped. On day 10, a financial report was misrouted to the mailroom. 80 pages. Quarterly earnings analysis for the board review. It had been sent to the wrong internal address by an analyst on the 28th floor who had transposed 2 digits in the routing code. Jolene found it in the outgoing bin at 20 inches the afternoon. She should have rerouted it. That was her job. Instead, she read the executive summary. Then, she read the full report. Then, she sat at the sorting table during her 5-minute break and wrote a 1-page summary on the back of a routing slip, not a rewrite. A distillation, the key variances, the margin risks. The 3 assumptions in the revenue model that did not hold under the company's own historical data. She clipped her summary to the front of the report and sent it to the correct address. Malcolm Jerome Pratt found the summary 3 hours later. Malcolm Jerome Pratt was 38 years old. He had been COO of Ashford Meridian Capital for 4 years. Before that, he had been an operations consultant at a firm that specialized in making inefficient companies efficient and billing them for the privilege. He was precise. He was fast. He did not tolerate ambiguity, and he did not ask questions he already knew the answer to. He was loyal to Darnell in the way that people who have been given a chance by someone who did not have to are loyal. Completely. Without conditions. Without needing to say it. Malcolm read the 1-page summary. He read it twice. Then he opened the 80-page report and compared them. The summary was better than the original executive overview. It identified risks the analyst had missed. It used the company's own data to challenge the company's own projections. He called the analyst. The analyst said he did not write it. Malcolm checked the routing log. The report had been misrouted through the mailroom. Someone in the mailroom had read an 80-page financial report, understood it, and produced a more accurate analysis than the department whose job it was to do exactly that. He called Jolene to the 30th floor. She arrived in the same clothes she wore every day. Clean. Pressed. The same shoes. She stood in front of his desk and did not sit down because he had not offered a chair. Malcolm did not introduce himself. He placed the summary on the desk between them. You wrote this? Yes. Where did you learn to read a financial model? On my own. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. Malcolm looked at her for a long time. He was a man who assessed people the way engineers assess materials, by what they could bear, by where they bent, by where they broke. He could not find the breaking point. You are in the mailroom. Yes, you do not belong in the mailroom. That is not for me to decide. Malcolm leaned back. He recognized something in the way she spoke. Not the words, the structure, the economy. She answered exactly what was asked, and nothing more. She did not volunteer. She did not explain. She did not perform. He had spent 15 years in rooms full of people who performed competence. This woman was not performing. Stay where you are. I will be watching. Jolene returned to the basement. She did not tell Coretta about the meeting. She did not mention the summary. She went back to the sorting table and picked up where she had left off. Coretta watched her come back and said nothing. But she noticed that Jolene's hands were steady. The same steadiness as always. Whatever had happened on the 30th floor had not changed anything Jolene was showing on the outside. It had changed something else. Malcolm opened his laptop that evening and typed a memo to himself. 1 line, mailroom hire, day 10, flagged for review. He did not send it to anyone. He saved it in a folder he kept for situations that did not yet have a category. He had only used that folder 3 times in 4 years. Day 15 was a Tuesday. Darnell Quincy Ashford took the service elevator to the basement at 4:47 inches the afternoon. He did not normally take the service elevator. He did not normally visit the basement. He did not normally do anything that was not on his calendar, and his calendar that day had him in his office until 6:00. He told himself he was checking on a facilities issue that had been flagged in the building management report. The report was real. The issue was a leaking pipe in the sub-basement storage area. He could have sent someone. He went himself. He found Jolene pushing a mail cart through the corridor between the loading dock and the sorting room. She saw him before he saw her. She did not stop pushing the cart. She did not adjust her posture or her pace. She continued at the same speed, as if the CEO of the company standing in a basement hallway was simply another obstacle in a route she had already optimized. He spoke first. "How are the 30 days? "I have 15 left." "And then what?" "That depends on what you see in 15 days. He looked at her. She was still holding the cart, not leaning on it, holding it the way someone holds something they are about to move. He noticed her hands. They were the hands of someone who had worked with them for a long time, not rough in the way of carelessness, worn in the way of repetition. He noticed the way she spoke. The sentence structure, the precision. No filler words, no hedging, no deference. She spoke the way people speak when every word costs something and they have learned not to waste. He had spent 25 years reading people. He had built a career on the ability to sit across from someone and know within 90 seconds whether they were worth the investment. He had developed this skill into something he trusted more than any financial model. Standing in a basement hallway on a Tuesday afternoon, looking at a woman pushing a mail cart who spoke with the precision of someone who had spent years preparing to be in exactly this building, he could not read her. He could not determine what she wanted. He could not identify the angle. This was unusual. It had not happened in a very long time. He nodded once and walked toward the service elevator. He did not say anything else. She did not expect him to. When he reached his office, he opened the HR system and pulled Jolene's employee file. The file contained her name, her age, her address, her emergency contact which was listed as none, her employment history which was blank, her education which listed an associate degree from an online program, her family status, single mother, one dependent. He looked at the file for a long time. That is not right. Nobody arrives that precise from nowhere. He closed the file. He did not open it again for 13 days. Coretta May Bridges, 61 years old. She had worked in the basement of that building since before the building had a name. She had started as a temp when the company was still called Ashford Development Group, and the mailroom was a folding table in a hallway near the boiler. She had watched the company change its name twice, its logo 3 times, and its CEO once. She had not changed anything about herself. She drank tea every morning from a chipped ceramic mug that she had brought from home on her first day 19 years ago. The mug had a phrase printed on it in faded block letters. "Patience is a weapon." She did not remember where she had bought it. She remembered what she had been going through when she bought it, and that the phrase had felt less like advice and more like a diagnosis. She had raised 2 sons alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Harlem. Both were grown now. One was a bus driver in Newark. The other had not called in 2 years. She did not talk about either of them at work. She did not talk about much at work. She had learned a long time ago that talking about your life in a building where you are invisible is the same as talking to the walls. The walls do not answer, and nobody on the floors above you is listening. Coretta had seen every kind of person come through that basement. Interns who treated the mailroom like a joke on their way to somewhere better. Executives who came down once a year for a facilities tour and looked at her the way you look at furniture that came with the lease. Temp workers who lasted 3 days. Maintenance staff who lasted 3 decades. She had cataloged all of them. Not by name, by type. Jolene did not fit a type. Coretta did not say this out loud. She did not need to. She simply began doing something she had not done for anyone in 19 years. She began sharing information. Not gossip, not opinion, structure. She told Jolene which floors made the real decisions. Not the executive floor, the 28th. That was where the analysts built the models that the executives signed. She told her which assistant controlled access to the CEO. Not the executive assistant the company listed on the website. The scheduling coordinator on the 31st floor, who managed the calendar and decided who got 15 minutes and who got rescheduled indefinitely. She told her which board member had been there longest and which one had been added most recently and which one never spoke in meetings but always voted last because he waited to see which way the room was leaning before committing. She told Jolene these things over the sorting table, between bins. While the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, she offered them the way she offered everything, without commentary, without instruction, like someone setting tools on a workbench and letting the other person decide which ones to pick up. Jolene listened. She did not take notes. She did not ask follow-up questions. She absorbed information the way she absorbed everything. Quietly. Completely. With the patience of someone who had learned that knowing the shape of a system is the first step to changing what it produces. Coretta did not ask Jolene what she intended to do with any of it. She did not ask because she already recognized the look. She had seen it once before. In a mirror. 19 years ago. When she had taken a temporary job in a basement and decided to make it permanent because being inside the building was worth more than being anywhere else when you were waiting for the right moment to matter. She poured Jolene a cup of tea one morning. In a second mug she kept in the drawer. She placed it on the sorting table without a word. Jolene picked it up and drank it without a word. Neither of them acknowledged the gesture. Neither of them needed to. It was not a small thing. In 19 years, Coretta had never shared the tea. Malcolm walked into Darnell's office on the morning of day 18 and closed the door behind him. He did not sit down. He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. The one-page summary Jolene had written. Darnell looked at it. He had already seen it. Malcolm knew that. This was not about the summary. This was about what to do with the person who wrote it. Move her to operations support. Temporary. No title change, no pay increase. Just access. Darnell looked at Malcolm for a moment. Do not tell her I approved it. Malcolm nodded. He understood. Darnell wanted to see what Jolene would do when she was given more room. Not what she would say, what she would do. There is a difference. Darnell had built his career on that difference. Jolene reported to the 26th floor on day 18 at 6:00 inches the morning. The operations support office was 3 desks, 2 filing cabinets, and a shared terminal that connected to the company's internal project archive. Her job was to prepare briefing materials for upcoming board meetings, compile reports, format data, organize files for the senior analysts who would present them. She did not ask why she had been moved. She did not ask who had approved it. She sat at the desk nearest the filing cabinet and opened the archive system and began reading. Not the files she had been assigned, all of them. The archive contained every project Ashford Meridian had developed, acquired, or managed in the last 20 years. Each project had a master file. Construction timelines, contractor agreements, safety, compliance reports, financial models, insurance records, incident logs. She worked through them methodically. The same way she had sorted mail, the same way she had traced corporate filings in the public library, with the patience of someone who knows exactly what she is looking for and is willing to read everything else to find it. On day 20, she found it. The file was labeled AMC Infrastructure SE DC 2009, a municipal drainage project on the east side of Washington, D.C., subcontracted through a regional construction group that Ashford Meridian had acquired 2 years before the project began. The file was 146 pages. She opened it at 7:14 inches the morning. She did not close it until 9:02. She read every page. She read the project scope. She read the contractor assignments. She read the safety compliance section. She read her father's safety report. 3 pages. Typed, dated 3 weeks before his death, detailing the structural compromise in the retaining wall, recommending immediate reinforcement, estimating the cost at $340,000. She read the margin note on the last page of the report. Handwritten. 2 words. Non-critical. Proceed. She read the signature beneath it. Reginald Stanton Cross, Project Oversight Director, Ashford Meridian Capital. She read the incident report filed after the wall collapsed. She read her father's name, Wendell Marcus Kinsley. Deceased. On site. Cause of death structural failure. She read the insurance settlement summary, the contractor's liability cap, the legal disposition. Case closed. No further action. She read it the way a surgeon reads a chart. With precision. Without flinching. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing did not change. The woman sitting 2 desks away did not notice anything because there was nothing to notice. Jolene's face was the same face it had been at 7:13. The only difference was what she now knew for certain. Reginald Stanton Cross. 64 years old. He had been a member of the Ashford Meridian Board of Directors for 18 years. He attended every quarterly meeting. He sat in a leather chair on the 34th floor. He voted on project approvals and risk assessments and capital allocations. He had shaken Darnell's hand at the last board dinner 3 weeks ago. He was scheduled to attend the next board meeting in 9 days. He was the man who had read her father's report and decided that $340,000 was too much to spend on keeping him alive. Jolene closed the file. She logged out of the archive. She sat at her desk for 4 minutes without moving. Then she reached into the bag under her desk and took out her father's notebook. Brown leather, corners soft. She opened it to the last page. She read what was written there. She read it slowly, the way she always read it, then she closed it and put it back. She did not copy the file. Not yet. She did not tell anyone what she had found. She did not go to the bathroom to cry. She did not call anyone. She picked up the next briefing document on her desk and continued preparing materials for the board meeting, as if the last 108 minutes had not happened. They had. That night, Jolene put Naomi to bed at 8:15. She read her a story about a rabbit who built a house out of sticks. Naomi fell asleep before the rabbit finished the roof. Jolene pulled the blanket up to her chin and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, watching her breathe. Then she went to the kitchen. She sat at the table. The notebook was on her left, her phone was on her right. On the phone were photographs of every page of the file she had read that morning. She had taken them during her lunch break when the office was empty. 146 pages. Photographed in 12 minutes. She looked at the photographs. She looked at the notebook. She could send the file to a journalist. She could file a complaint with OSHA. She could contact a lawyer. She could walk into Darnell's office in the morning and put the file on his desk and say the name Reginald Stanton Cross and watch what happened. Any of those would end the 30 days. Any of those would end the job. Any of those would end whatever she was building inside that building before it became something strong enough to matter. And Naomi needed her to have a job. Naomi needed a mother who came home every night. Naomi needed stability more than Jolene needed revenge. Jolene sat at the kitchen table and made a decision. She did not make it quickly. She made it the way her father made decisions. By looking at the load path, by following the weight, by identifying where the structure was weakest and where reinforcement would hold. She was not going to destroy the company. She was not going to leak the file. She was not going to burn the building from the outside. She was going to climb to a position where her voice carried weight inside it, and then she was going to speak. Not from anger, from authority. There is a difference. She put the phone down. She opened the notebook to the last page one more time. She read what her father had written there. She closed it. From the bedroom, Naomi stirred. A small voice in the dark. You came to get me. I always come to get you. It meant more this time. It meant more because of what Jolene had chosen not to do. The easy path was destruction. The path she chose was construction. She chose it for the same reason she chose everything. Because Naomi was watching, and what you build in front of your children becomes part of how they build. The Ashford Langley project was the largest development in the company's pipeline, a mixed-use complex on the west side of the city. Commercial ground floors, residential upper levels, $340 million across a 5-year build. The board was scheduled to vote on final approval in 6 days. Jolene was assigned to compile the briefing package. 14 documents. Financial projections, market analysis, zoning compliance, construction timelines, risk assessment, environmental impact. She was supposed to format them and print them and place them in 9 binders for 9 board members and deliver them to the 34th floor conference room 24 hours before the meeting. She did all of that. She also read every document. She read the financial model first. 38 pages of projections built on assumptions about material costs, labor rates, permitting timelines, and market absorption. The model had been prepared by the in-house analytics team on the 28th floor. It was thorough. It was well formatted. It was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Not wrong in a way that a quick review would catch. Wrong in the way that matters most. The base assumption for construction material costs used 2021 pricing data indexed forward at 3.2% annual inflation. The actual inflation rate for commercial construction materials over the past 3 years had averaged 7.1%. The difference on paper looked small, a few percentage points, but compounded across a 5-year build on a $340 million project. The gap produced a cumulative shortfall of $28 million that was not accounted for in the contingency budget. Nobody had caught it because nobody had checked the base assumption. They had checked the formulas. They had checked the formatting. They had checked the summary tables. But the number at the bottom of every column was only as accurate as the number at the top. And the number at the top was wrong. Jolene wrote the analysis in 4 pages. She did not use her name. She did not use emotional language. She did not mention her father or safety reports or anything that was not directly relevant to the financial model in front of her. She wrote it the way Wendell would have written a structural report. Here is the data. Here is the error. Here is what happens if it is not corrected. Here is the cost of correction versus the cost of proceeding without it. She placed the 4 pages on Malcolm's desk at 5:45 inches the evening. She left the building. She ran 14 blocks to the daycare. She arrived at 5:58. Malcolm found the document at 7:00 the next morning. He read it. He read it again. He sat at his desk without moving for 4 minutes. Then he picked up the phone and called Darnell. He walked into Darnell's office with the 4 pages and placed them on the desk the way he had placed the 1-page summary 2 weeks earlier. Darnell read the first page, then the second. Then he went back to the first. Who wrote this? The woman from the mailroom. Darnell looked at the pages for a long time. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The document was precise. The analysis was correct. The error was real. And the person who found it had been in the building for 23 days, had started in the basement, and had not once asked for credit or recognition or a title or a raise. She had simply done the work that nobody else had done and left it where it would be found. He picked up the phone and told his assistant to bring Jolene Kinsley to the 34th floor. Jolene walked into the CEO's office at 9:15 on a Wednesday morning. Day 27. She had never been on the 34th floor. The carpet was different from every other floor. Thicker. The kind of carpet that absorbs sound so completely that the room feels like it exists outside of the building it sits in. Darnell was standing behind his desk. The 4-page report was open in front of him. He did not ask her to sit. She did not ask if she could. This is yours. Yes, he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the lobby 27 days earlier, but differently. In the lobby, he had been looking at a woman he could not categorize. Now, he was looking at a woman he could not explain. Where did you learn to read a financial model at this level? I went to school online. I learned the rest from my father. He was an engineer. Yes, was. He died on a construction site 14 years ago. The room was quiet. Darnell did not look away from her. He did not offer condolences. He did not ask which site. He would learn that later. For now, he was processing something else. He was looking at a 29-year-old woman who had lost her father to the kind of project his company financed and had walked into his building and asked for a job and had spent 27 days proving that she belonged on the floor she was standing on. He recognized something. Not sympathy, recognition. The specific recognition of one person who had built themselves from nothing looking at another person who had done the same thing and understanding that the raw material was identical even if the outcome was not yet equal. I want you to present the financial analysis to the board. Day 29, the Ashford Langley Review. Jolene did not blink. The full board. 9 members. You will present the risk section. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she nodded once. She turned and walked toward the door. She opened it. She stepped into the hallway. The elevator was 40 feet away. She walked to it. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed. She stood alone in the elevator. She had 2 days. She had waited 11 years for those 2 days. Jolene sat on the floor of the apartment that night with her laptop open on the coffee table. The screen glowed in the dim room. Naomi was on the bed behind her drawing with crayons on a piece of printer paper Jolene had brought home from the office. The presentation was 18 slides. The financial analysis, the risk projections, the corrected material cost assumptions, the $8 million gap, the recommended adjustments, everything Darnell had asked her to present. She built it in 3 hours. Clean, precise, no wasted slides, no decoration, numbers and logic and the clear language of consequence. Then she opened a new slide, slide 19. She did not type immediately. She sat with her hands on the keyboard and looked at the blank white rectangle on the screen. Then she began. The slide was titled Safety Compliance History. She pulled data from the company's own public filings, annual reports, OSHA records, contractor incident logs that she had found in the archive during her time in operation support. She built a timeline, 15 years of construction projects managed directly or through subsidiaries by Ashford Meridian Capital. She identified 4 projects where safety reports had been filed by on-site engineers flagging structural or procedural risks. She identified which of those reports had resulted in corrective action and which had been overridden. One project stood out. A municipal drainage project in southeast Washington, D.C. in 2009. A safety report filed by the lead engineer 3 weeks before a fatal structural collapse. The report recommended $340 0 inches reinforcement. The recommendation was overridden. The engineer died. Jolene did not put her father's name on the slide. She put the numbers, the cost of the recommended reinforcement versus the cost of the subsequent litigation, the cost of the OSHA fine, the cost of the insurance payout. The total cost of ignoring the report was $4.2 million. The cost of following it would have been $340 000. She calculated the ratio. For every dollar saved by overriding the safety report, the company had spent $12.35 in consequences. She did not frame this as a moral argument. She framed it as a financial one. She built the slide the way her father had built the safety report, with data, with precision, with the knowledge that the people who would read it only responded to one language, and she spoke it. She finished at 1140. She closed the laptop. She picked up her father's notebook from the table beside the bed. She opened it to the last page. She read what was written there, slowly. The way she always read it. She closed the notebook. She closed the laptop. She looked at Naomi, who had fallen asleep, with a crayon still in her hand. Orange. The crayon had rolled against the pillow and left a small mark on the cotton. Jolene whispered the same thing she whispered every night. Tomorrow I come to get you. The conference room on the 34th floor had a table that seated 14. 9 chairs were occupied. The board members arrived between 8:45 and 9:00. Coffee had been set on a credenza along the east wall. The windows faced south. The morning light came in at an angle that made the room feel like it existed above the city rather than inside it. Reginald Stanton Cross sat in the 3rd chair on the left side. He had sat in that chair for 18 years. He arrived at 8:52 as he always did. He placed his briefing binder on the table. He opened it to the first tab. He did not look up when the door opened again. Jolene entered the room at 9:01. She was carrying a laptop and nothing else. She wore the same clothes she had worn every day for 29 days. Clean, pressed. The shoes were the same shoes. She walked to the presentation screen at the head of the table and set the laptop down and opened it and connected the display cable in a single motion that took 4 seconds. Darnell was already seated. He introduced her with one sentence. "This is Jolene Kinsley." She found what the rest of you missed. The room did what boardrooms do when an unfamiliar person is presented without context. It assessed. 9 sets of eyes moved from Darnell to Jolene and back. Some looked at her clothes. Some looked at her age. One looked at her hands. Reginald looked at his binder. Jolene opened the first slide. She did not introduce herself again. She did not thank anyone for the opportunity. She did not smile. She began. The Ashford-Langley financial model assumes a 3.2% annual inflation rate on construction materials based on 2021 baseline pricing. The actual average for commercial construction materials over the last 3 years is 7.1%. Compounded over the 5-year build timeline at current project scale, this produces a cumulative shortfall of $28.4 million that is not reflected in the contingency allocation. She moved through the slides the way she moved through the mailroom, with precision, without pause. Each slide contained one point. Each point was supported by the company's own data. She did not editorialize. She did not qualify. She presented numbers and let the numbers do what numbers do when they are arranged correctly. They told the truth. By slide 4, the board member in the second chair on the right had stopped writing. He had put his pen down and was watching the screen. By slide 7, the woman at the end of the table had leaned forward. By slide 12, Malcolm, who was seated against the wall and not at the table, had not moved in 6 minutes. The board asked questions. Jolene answered each one. Not quickly, precisely. She gave exactly the information the question required and nothing more. How did you identify the base rate discrepancy? I compared the model's assumption against Bureau of Labor Statistics data for the same period and cross-referenced it with the company's own material procurement records from the last 3 projects of comparable scale. Why was this not caught in the original review? The formulas in the model are correct. The error is in the input assumption. Reviews typically verify calculation logic. They do not always verify whether the starting number reflects current conditions. Reginald had not spoken. He had not moved. His pen was still in his hand, but it had not touched paper since slide 3. He was looking at the screen the way people look at something they are trying to place. Not the data. The structure of the presentation. The precision. Something about it was familiar to him in a way he had not yet identified. Darnell sat at the head of the table and did not speak. He watched the room the way he always watched rooms, by tracking who moved and who did not. Jolene finished slide 18. The financial analysis was complete. The board had the data, the corrected projections, the recommended adjustments, the revised contingency. Everything Darnell had asked her to present. He began to speak. He was about to thank her. I have one more section, if you will allow me. Darnell looked at her. She looked back. The room was silent. He nodded. Jolene opened slide 19. The title read, Safety Compliance, History. She did not pause. She did not explain why she had added a section that was not in the original brief. She began the way she had begun every other section, with data. Over the last 15 years, Ashford Meridian Capital has managed or subcontracted 43 construction projects across 9 states. Of those 43 projects, on-site engineers filed formal safety concern reports on 4. 2 of those reports resulted in immediate corrective action. 2 were overridden. She clicked to the next slide. A chart, cost of compliance versus cost of consequences. 2 columns. One showed the estimated expense of following the safety recommendation. The other showed the actual expense incurred when the recommendation was ignored. Litigation, fines, insurance payouts, operational delays. The first overridden report involved a structural reinforcement recommendation on a project in 2014. The recommended cost was $180,000. The report was overridden. A partial collapse occurred 4 months later. No fatalities. Total cost, including litigation, remediation, and regulatory penalties, was $1.9 million. She clicked again. The second overridden report was filed in 2009, a municipal infrastructure project in Southeast Washington, D.C. The on-site engineer identified a structural compromise in a retaining wall and recommended reinforcement at an estimated cost of $340,000. The report was reviewed by the project oversight director and marked non-critical. She paused, not for effect, because the next sentence was the one she had carried for 14 years. 3 weeks later, the retaining wall failed. The engineer who wrote the report was below grade at the time of the collapse. He was killed on site. The room was still. Reginald's hand had stopped moving. The pen was still between his fingers, but it had stopped moving 90 seconds ago. He was looking at the screen. He was no longer trying to place what was familiar. He had placed it, the structure, the precision, the data-first approach. He had seen it before, in a 3-page report, typed, dated 3 weeks before a wall came down, Jolene did not look at him. She looked at the room. The cost of ignoring a safety report in this case was 1 human life and $4.2 million in subsequent litigation. The cost of compliance would have been $340,000. This is not a moral argument. This is a financial one. The question is whether this company's current safety protocols reflect what we learned from that failure or whether they reflect what we chose to forget. She closed the laptop. Nobody in the room asked who the engineer was. They did not need to. The last name on the incident report was the same as the name on the presentation slide. The room emptied slowly. Board members stood and gathered their binders and moved toward the door in the way people move when they have received information they have not yet decided how to hold. Some looked at Jolene as they passed. Most did not. One nodded. Nobody spoke. Reginald Stanton Cross stood from his chair. He picked up his binder. He placed his pen in his jacket pocket. He walked to the door without making eye contact with anyone in the room. His footsteps on the carpet made no sound. He left. Malcolm remained seated against the wall. Darnell remained at the head of the table. Jolene stood where she had stood for the entire presentation. She had not moved from that spot in 34 minutes. Darnell looked at her. "You did not come here for a job. I came here for both. The job and the answer." What answer? Whether this company would do the right thing when it had the chance. The room was quiet. The coffee on the credenza had gone cold. The morning light had shifted and no longer reached the table. "Sit down. Tell me about your father." Jolene sat. She told him. Not everything. The parts that mattered. Wendell Marcus Kinsley, civil engineer, self-taught then formally trained, built infrastructure in neighborhoods nobody else would bid on, carried a notebook, wrote a safety report 3 weeks before he died. The report was ignored. The wall came down. He did not come home. She told him about Diane. The lawsuit, the hospital, the Sunday morning in November. She told him about the notebook, still in her coat pocket, every page intact. Darnell listened the way he listened when Malcolm presented something that required a decision that could not be undone, without moving, without interrupting, without looking away. "What do you want?" "I want the safety protocols rewritten. I want an independent audit of every project where a safety report was overridden, and I want the 30 days to become permanent, not because of who my father was, because of the report I just gave you." Darnell looked at her for a long time. He was a man who had spent 30 years reducing people to variables, risk profiles, return projections, probability assessments. He had done it so long that it had become the only way he knew how to see. He was looking at Jolene Kinsley, and for the second time in 29 days, he could not reduce her to anything. She was not a variable. She was not a projection. She was a woman who had walked into his building with a 3-year-old on her shoulder and a dead man's notebook in her coat, and had spent 29 days proving that she belonged in every room she entered, including this one. He nodded once. "The audit begins Monday." Reginald Stanton Cross did not wait for the board to act. He knew how these things moved. He had been in the room when the presentation ended. He had seen the faces. He had seen the data on the screen. He had seen a chart that calculated the exact cost of 2 words he had written in a margin 14 years ago. Non-critical. Proceed. The board convened an internal audit within 48 hours. The scope covered every construction project in which a safety compliance report had been filed and subsequently overridden. The audit identified 3 additional projects beyond the 2 Jolene had presented. In each case, Reginald had been the signatory on the override decision. 2 of the 3 had experienced structural incidents. Neither had resulted in a fatality. Both had resulted in insurance claims that the company had settled quietly. The pattern was not dramatic. It was bureaucratic. A man who had been given authority over safety, compliance decisions, and had exercised that authority in the direction of margin preservation for 18 years, not out of malice, out of the same logic that had built the company. What is the return? What is the risk? What is the cost of being wrong? He had simply applied that logic to human safety and had been comfortable with the results for long enough that comfort became conviction. Reginald resigned on a Thursday. 4 days after the board meeting, he submitted his letter before the audit results were finalized. He knew what they would show. He called Darnell that evening. His voice had lost the steadiness he had carried into boardrooms for 2 decades. The steadiness that had made him convincing. The steadiness that had made 2 words in a margin feel like a reasonable decision. It was 14 years ago. The engineer's name was Wendell Kinsley. His daughter has been working in your building for 29 days. You walked past her in the hallway and did not know. Reginald was quiet for a long time. The audit results will be public. The board has already voted. Darnell hung up. Reginald Stanton Cross had spent 18 years on a board that approved projects and managed risk and allocated capital. He had attended dinners and charity events and quarterly reviews. He had built a reputation on reliability and consistency and the kind of measured judgment that people at his level performed so well they forgot they were performing. He had been comfortable. Comfort makes people careless in ways that poverty never does. The position Darnell created did not exist before Jolene. Risk management and safety compliance. Reporting directly to the COO. Full access to the project archive. Full authority to flag and halt any active project where safety protocols had not been independently verified, he told her on a Friday morning. Day 30. Not as charity, as a correction. There is a difference. Jolene looked at him. She understood the structure of the sentence. She had heard him use it before. The first time he said it on the day they met, it had meant something about efficiency, about keeping people at a distance and calling it a system. This time, it meant something else. It meant that correcting a failure is not generosity. It is obligation. And that recognizing the difference is the first sign that a system is beginning to repair itself. She accepted the position. She did not shake his hand. She nodded once the way he had nodded at her in the basement hallway 2 weeks earlier. The gesture that meant everything that needed to be said had been said without saying it. That evening, Jolene came home to the apartment. Naomi was asleep. The babysitter from the building down the hall had put her to bed at 7:30. Jolene paid the babysitter and closed the door and stood in the kitchen and looked at the apartment. The same apartment, the same table, the same cracked laptop. She sat down. She took the notebook from her coat pocket, brown leather, corners soft. She opened it to the last page. She had read this page more times than she could count. On buses, in break rooms, at sorting tables, in the dark of apartments where the heat did not work and the morning would come too early and the weight of what she was carrying felt like it might outlast her ability to carry it. But she had never read it after what happened today. She had never read it from this side of the story. Wendell had written it the week Jolene was born. The handwriting was smaller than the rest of the notebook, tighter, more careful, as if he knew he was writing something that would need to last. He wrote about his daughter, about holding her for the first time, about the weight of her in his arms, and the way she gripped his finger, and the sound she made when she was breathing but not yet awake. He wrote about the apartment and the light through the window and the city outside and the world that waited for her on the other side of everything he could build. He wrote about his one fear. Not poverty, not failure, not the jobs that paid too little, or the systems that worked too slowly, or the men who made decisions about other men's safety from offices they never left. His one fear was that his daughter would grow up in a world that looked at her circumstances and decided they were the same as her capabilities, that the world would see where she came from and decide it already knew where she was going. If you are reading this, and I am not there, I need you to know, what they see is not what you are. What you build will always outlast what they take. Below that, in the same tight handwriting, one more line, the last thing he wrote. I wanted to give you a world that... The sentence ended there. He did not finish it. He went to work that morning. He did not come home. Jolene sat at the table and looked at the unfinished sentence. She had spent 14 years reading it as grief, as the proof that something had been cut short, as the measure of what had been taken. Tonight, she read it differently. Tonight, the unfinished sentence was not what he failed to give her. It was what she had spent 29 days completing. Not in words, in action. In the walk across the lobby with a 3-year-old on her shoulder, in the mailroom and the sorting table and the 14 blocks at 531 every evening, in the 4-page report and the slide she added, and the room full of board members who had to decide whether to look away or look directly at what their company had done. In the notebook she had carried in her coat pocket for 14 years, The one thing nobody could take because it was part of her. He wanted to give her a world. She built one instead. She closed the notebook. She walked into the bedroom. Naomi was asleep. The crayon was gone. Someone had put it on the nightstand. Jolene sat on the edge of the bed. Naomi stirred. Her eyes opened halfway. "You came to get me." "I always come to get you." This time the words held everything. The daycare at 558. The kitchen table decisions. The courtroom Diane never won. The safety report Wendell filed that nobody read. The 29 days. The 14 years. The notebook. The unfinished sentence. The finished one. Naomi closed her eyes. Jolene stayed on the edge of the bed for a long time. Reginald Stanton Cross signed a document that said a man's safety report was non-critical. He wrote those 2 words and went home and ate dinner, and slept and went to work the next morning, and continued doing that for 14 years without once stopping to ask what those 2 words had cost. Jolene Therese Kinsley carried that man's notebook for 14 years. She walked into the building where his death was filed under case closed. She started in the basement. She sorted mail. She ran 14 blocks in worn-out shoes. She found the file. She read the margin note. She did not break a single thing. She built. The world decided which one of them was qualified. There is someone right now sitting in a position that does not match what they are capable of. Not because they lack skill, not because they have not earned it, because the door was never opened. And sometimes the person who opens that door is the person who was never supposed to be in the building. Dignity does not come from a title. Competence does not require permission. And justice does not always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing at the head of a boardroom table on the 34th floor of a building she entered through the basement, presenting data so precise that the room has no choice but to listen. Not because she demanded it, because she earned it. Every day. For 29 days. And for the 14 years before that. The quietest people in the room are sometimes carrying the most. The people nobody looks at twice are sometimes the ones holding everything together. And the ones who were never given the chance are sometimes the ones who would have changed everything if they had been. If this story made you think about someone who has been overlooked, share it with them. Not because it will fix anything, because being seen is the beginning of being valued. And being valued is the beginning of being heard. If it made you remember someone whose work was never recognized, say their name out loud. Names matter. They matter more than titles. They last longer than positions. Wendell Marcus Kinsley. Say it. He built things that kept other things standing. Nobody should have to die to prove that matters. If it made you angry, that anger is information. Do not waste it. Subscribe. See you in the next one.